session 2, which is looking into the management of pasture in AMS, so pasture-based systems. We are joined today by 3 farmers, Wayne Clarke from New South Wales, Nick Dornoff and from Tassie, and Brian Yates from New Zealand. So a quick intro of these farmers. Wayne is from Dobby's Bight in New South Wales. It's on the mid-north coast. He has 4 robots and milks approximately 300 cows and uses a 3-way grazing system, but has the ability to modify the system when or if he needs to. Nick down in Tassie manages Gala Farm, which is a family, Dornoff Dairies family business. It has about 600 cows milking with 4-way grazing. They originally installed robots in 2011, the Delaval robotic rotary, and have since in 2019 put in 8 single box robots. And then in New Zealand, we've got Brian Yates joining us from across the ditch, and he is a 3-way grazing system with 2 robots installed in 2010. So I will hand over to Wayne. We will listen to all the farmers as the same as the first session. They'll all speak, and then we'll have questions at the end, but you are welcome to type your questions in as we go through, and then we'll get to the questions at the end with all the farmers together. So Wayne, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Tori. Yeah, so we milk 280 to 300 mixed breed cows through 4 robots. All our milk goes north for 3 hours to Brisbane to supply the white milk market. You definitely characterise this as a subtropical farm. We use the 1100 plus mils of summer dominant rainfall to grow our main feed base, which is kaikiu. It does particularly well around here. It's naturalised, so we try and make the best use of that as we can. That normally kicks off about now, and we graze that through till March, and then we oversow that with annual ryegrass, which we get about 6 months out of, which we graze and get a bit of silage out of that. Our other main feed source is corn and soybean silage, which we grow in the summer periods. So that picture you see there, that aerial picture, is the layout. That was taken in September, which is our dry period, and it was a particularly dry period. So our farm is the green bit. We're right, you can see where the river surrounds us, where it's a very flat farm, but very fertile soil. We that's where it says 220 Elford's Road. If you go directly right at that, that's where the dairy is, and you can, and then we fan out from there. We basically use the ABC grazing in that roughly 45 hectares that you've seen the bend in the river there, which is all kaikiu. But you can see it was really dry. You can see those little round circles there. Our towable, we got 120 towable micro pivots, or they used to be called bike shift. If you want, look that up on the internet and check that out. But we mainly only irrigate during winter, just because that's our dry period, being subtropical. So you can see the light shaded areas where we're just grazing, and the 3 different light shaded areas are A, B, and C. So you'll see we're grazing pretty hard. It's only just enough feed there, so we're really conscious of utilising as much feed as we can. Typically 9 to 11 tonnes of dry matter, but some of our best paddocks will do up to 15 tonnes of dry matter a year. guess so we also have a feed pad that we make use of. There's a new picture. That's my brother Paul. I'm in partnership with him. He's on the right, and that's the cows grazing some of the ryegrass during winter. We had a pretty good winter, 6 months, and then we dried off pretty hard, and it sort of deteriorated since then. Okay. This morning people talked about heifers. Our strategy is, we have a couple of strategies. We can divert them off into a fourth grazing. We pretty much expect the cows to go wherever there's an open gate, so that we're not locked into any specific laneways. We're happy to send them up and down or up different laneways, and they've got the idea that they'll do that. Okay, so we can, if the heifers come under pressure, we can draft them off to a fourth area. We find that particularly useful. Another thing we can do is draft them off during the night through the hospital, we term the hospital pen, and feed them silage separately. And that's a good way we found to make sure they get milked and they get fed, and we can overcome those problems. There was another photo. I don't know if Tori, if we can go to the next. Did you get that next one? Maybe not.
No, that's it, Wayne.
Okay. I did have another photo showing the cows going into the A grazing. We sort of use the A grazing as our, if you can imagine the turnover grazing, it's about 11 or 12 o'clock in the day, and it's only open for 6 hours. But we use that for the cows to either the starter cows will go straight through to the paddock, whereas the fresh cows will start going onto the feed pad, and we'll feed them extra grain. We only average about 4 kilos of grain in the robots, and we don't use out of feeder parlors. That's where we can feed to production. We can also take advantage of the jerseys and the Jersey crosses that produce quite well on straight, on mainly grass, and then we can favour the bigger cows, the Friesian or the fresh Friesian cows, and push their production along. And then of a night time, they'll go into the B grazing from, say, about 6 o'clock through to 3 o'clock in the morning, and that'll normally be our bigger grazing, especially in summer. We don't have to worry so much about how much feed we give them. That just happens because the heat drives them out. So that's pretty much the system that we use. Yep. Thanks, Tori.
Thanks for that, Wayne. We'll go straight on to Nick, if you're there. Perfect. Thanks, Nick.
Sorry, I think you've got audio now, hopefully. I'll just introduce myself first. I'm Nick Dornoff. We farm in northern Tasmania near Deloraine. I'm a third generation dairy farmer. My grandparents started farming in the 60s. We started with 60 odd mixed breed cows, and have slowly scaled our way up to milking about 2,300 cows, or black and white LIC Friesians today, on 4 separate dairy farming properties. I'm here today to obviously talk about our robotic parlour. Our robotic journey started sort of around 2009, 2010, well, there was a bit of industry interest in what robots could offer, and we were quite keen to investigate this and see what robotic farming could have to offer us and how it might be able to future-proof our business moving forward. The challenge for us in a pasture-based system, which is Tasmania, which is where we operate, was that there weren't hundreds of examples of adaptation of robots to voluntary pasture-based dairy farming in Australia or even in the world, and certainly none at the sort of scale that we wanted to do, which was to sort of push 500 to 600 cows. Our farming environment, we have about 1,000 mils of annual rainfall. Unlike Clarke's, it's fairly winter dominant. We supplement our irrigated perennial rye pastures through the summer with irrigation. And yeah, under good irrigated conditions, we can grow and or we can harvest 13 to 14 tonnes of dry matter a year, and dry land, depending on the season, sort of 8 to 10. It was fairly non-negotiable for us when we were investigating robots that the robots needed to fit into a pasture-based style of farming, not try to bastardise robots or change our system to accommodate robots. Obviously, there's a lot of knowledge and research and stuff around that profitability in our pasture-based systems is driven by our ability to direct harvest large amounts of pasture. So continuing to do that was quite important for us. We started with the AMR, as Tori alluded to, in 2011, and at that point there were only a handful of farmers operating in Australia. We had some great support from Future Dairy, and we embarked our journey voluntary milking in the spring of 2011. At that point, a lot of the industry knowledge and work had been around a three-way grazing system offering 3 equal 8-hour breaks, which was what we started with, and it worked quite well. It was a great starting point. It made it quite simple to start to learn into how to operate and adapt our cows and system to robots. What we found, we had challenges in and around being a larger herd, in that we had a great number of cows that had to go through the same number of smart gates and single way path that other smaller farms do. So we have a lot more traffic. We have a lot longer walking distances. So we had a few different challenges to more the typical pasture-based adaptation that we had to face, and that maybe shaped the direction of our journey moving forward. As I said, three-way grazing we felt worked quite well. It was quite simple, and yeah, for 1 to 2 years, it provided a good starting point for us to move forward. What we did find sort of in year 2, year 3, as we started putting more cows into the system, we were reducing idle times, asking cows to walk a bit further than they had, and trying to improve our pasture management. We just started to see a few little issues starting to pop up, which sort of led us down the path of our next journey, which was building on that three-way grazing and moving to a more flexible 4-way grazing model. So a couple of the factors that led us to that was, under three-way grazing and even 8-hour breaks, we found that not necessarily the quantity of the feed, but the quality of the feed over an 8-hour period was degrading fairly rapidly, meaning that the cows that went to a break first got an absolute pick of the allocation, and then cows sort of in that 6th, 7th and 8th hour were going to a fairly degraded pasture base by that point. And those cows started to cotton on to that, and we started seeing cows queuing at the dairy more often. In essence, they were outsmarting us with the system, and they were wanting to queue at the dairy to be the cows to the next break, which, as we threw more and more cows into the system and had less idle time, it just created issues for us. So we actually went away. We went to a robot farmer conference and just tried to sort of take a step back to try to understand what was our next hurdle and how we could change our system or slightly to try and improve that. And we kept coming back to four-way grazing and also not equal allocations across the 24-hour period. So our farm, there was a photo, the one just prior, that had our farm map, and it had 4 areas, and you might have seen that all of those 4 areas were different in size. So the D area is quite small and the B area is quite large, and A and C are sort of similar. So we sort of came back from that, and we had some sort of historical growth data that we could work out how much we were growing and what was available in those 4 areas. So we took a step back and thought, well, why don't we pro-rata how long those areas are open in alignment with how much feed is available. And then also throwing in a 4th area D, we felt that by shortening up all of those breaks and creating one more opportunity for a new break, we'd sort of balance out the feed quality availability across the day and improve cow performance, because under the old system, we did find that there was a wider spectrum of cow performance. There were some cows that were doing really, really well, and there were others that weren't trafficking as well, that were always getting the end of the tail end of feeds. So that led us to 4-way grazing. And now we have the D breaks only open for a couple of hours a day, and the B breaks open for about 8, and the other 2 are open for 6 and 7 hours. And we feel that that's balanced out where the feed's available, when it's available, and how we can make it available to the cows across the day. And we certainly have found over the course of the last few years that it's, in essence, it has created a little bit more complexity in our system, but in many ways it's actually simplified it and made it easier to manage. Cows don't seem to be queuing as much. Cows seem to sort of adapt and manage those breaks. You don't have a big burst of cows at gate changes. We have a lot flatter cow performance, which obviously suits the utilisation of the system as well. The other 2 things that we have done differently in terms of these sessions about pasture-based farming, we're not scared to actually, we have some of those areas that are interchangeable. So we found ourselves under 3-way grazing, sometimes breaking good pasture management strategies. If an area average pasture cover was getting a bit higher in one area, we found that it was really hard to accommodate that. So we've actually designed the system so some areas are actually interchangeable, so we can drop a B paddock into D or a D paddock into A as well. It just gives us lots more flexibility with how we manage. And the other thing, we take great pride in actually making sure our cows meet our grazing targets in all of those 4 areas. So we do have a reasonable amount of employed labour on that robotic farm, and we have goals each day. We know how much feed we've allocated in A, B, C and D, and accordingly we know how many cows need to get to that area for us to meet residual. So we actually have a goal, and it might be 360 cows need to get to C every day, 200 to D and vice versa. So it's actually proactively managing that grazing and having targets that our staff work towards, which just balance it out. And it also might mean if we get an allocation wrong, or the weather's inclement, or we have a heat wave for Tassie, which might be 25 degrees, we'll actually go out and proactively manage the cows as well. So if we do need to do a bit of an early collect to make sure we get enough cows to that next break, or give them a bit more grass because they're going to come back early, we're not afraid to actually actively manage the system a little bit to improve performance, because quite often, more often than not, in a grazing system, we find that if you make a mistake in one area, whether it be allocation or number of cows, it takes quite a number, an amount of time to be able to get back over that hurdle. So for us in actively managing that, we hope we have a lot flatter performance with less peaks and troughs and put a lot more predictability in it. So it is voluntary, but we're not afraid to intervene if necessary. So I think that's probably my 10 minutes. So I'll stop rambling. Thanks, Tori.
Thanks, Nick. That was fantastic. And we'll go straight on to Brian. But just before you start, Brian, just a reminder that you are, if you've got questions as we go, do send them through so that we can, we'll go through them as with all the farmers in a panel at the end of the session. All right, Brian, you're all good to go?
Yeah. Hey, well, Tori, how are you? A little bit daunting.
Good,
bit daunting going after Nick. He's the brains trust on pasture management. I've learned a lot from Nick. So I'll quickly talk about our farm here. Probably first and foremost, we're an organic farm, which brings another whole set of challenges. We supply Fonterra, and our product gets shipped globally to Australia, throughout Asia, into the United States, and also now into Canada as well, which has been a lot of work through getting certified to get to that point, but we're very excited to achieve that. So we milk 165 cows on a 130-acre family farm. The milking platform itself is made up of 90 hectares, which is with the three-way grazing, it's essentially 30 hectares in each area, and the extra 40 hectares we run our dry stock on, and all of our young animals too. We're essentially a closed herd. We don't buy animals in, and we try not to buy feed in as well too. That's a big part of being organic, is you have to be able to ensure that you can supply your own feed for the entire year, and that includes drought scenario as well too, because the basically organic feed is hard to come by, and if you can find it, it's quite cost prohibitive as well. So the pasture-based free flow grazing system, it actually lends itself quite nicely to our sort of holistic farming philosophy, which is that we want to run a profitable business, but we want to do that in harmony with the soil and with the cows. So you will notice by those numbers that we do have quite a low stocking rate, and that does enable us to harvest a lot of supplement in times of excess that help us get through the dry periods, which are becoming more common. We get 1,200 mils a year rainfall here, which is quite nice, but last year we only had 800, and the year prior to that it was only a little bit more than that as well too. So one of our issues at the moment moving forward is finding ways to combat that, and so we're starting to look at C4 pastures a little bit to try and find more drought resistant grasses. We do typically plant quite diverse pastures, being something we do, and we're finding a lot of success with not only with our clover and ryegrass mixes. We'll throw in chicory, plantain, cocksfoot, and we have trialled a few other species as well too, and we are getting some good results through using those mixed pastures. So we find that being able to allow the cow to have the freedom to walk herself to the shed and then be milked, and then from paddock to paddock, is as big a part of our farm story as the robots themselves. And there's the girls. So you know, for every dairy farmer, animal welfare is such a major part of running a business nowadays. And I think moving forward, the next step, what I've heard around the place is the market is going to start to demand information and research on the cow's actual mental health, as odd as that may sound, but the market's going to want to know are the cows actually happy? And I think this type of grazing setup with having to be able to just meander their way through the day, it's so vastly different from a conventional non-robotic farm where they're pushed up the race and then crowded in the yard, that I think there's it's this way of farming is going to be the gold standard in the future for markets looking for real, true welfare people that are doing it right. So I've got notes everywhere. I can't talk off the dome that well, Tori, so I'll get rid of these. Just quickly touching on pasture-based grazing management. So when we first started, way back, going on nearly 12 years ago now, I used the plate meter a lot, being told that was what every good farmer does, use the plate meter. So I had the amount I wanted to give them, and I go out and measure it, and I'd set the breaks and divide that evenly into 3 areas, and very, very quickly realized that it essentially became farming by feel, and just trying to figure out how much grass do you make available in each break. And a little bit what Nick touched on before is our gate change times. We have 3 gate change times in the day. They're at the moment they're at 12 p.m., 6 p.m. and 1 a.m. So those are not evenly divided across a 24-hour day. So they've got access to one particular area for a vastly longer time. And basically have come to this point just over the years through just observing the cow's movement and trying to get better utilization through the night time. And we found so that the 1 a.m. change used to be 7 a.m. in the morning, and we found we weren't getting that movement at night. And through talking to other farmers, trying to find ways on how to correct this, I was advised that just make the change, just put it in the middle of the night. Even though cows aren't there, they will learn and adapt. And so the information I got was bang on. We just slowly crept it back to 1 a.m. and now probably our busiest time of the 24-hour cycle is probably from midnight to sort of 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. And I mean, they like moving through at that time of the 24-hour cycle because it's nice and cool, and it's a new break. And in that break too, we'll probably add some extra feed in the form of baleage. So although area for a long time, there is more feed available to them in there. Just touching on feed as well too, we are primarily pasture only, and that's in keeping with what Fonterra Organic Farms sort of marketed as. Pasture-based organic milk has a very valuable commodity in other markets overseas. So the less concentrate we can feed to our cows, the better it is for organic for Fonterra to be able to sell it. So we do grow our own maize grain though, and we feed that in parlour just through the robots. We don't have any feed stations, and it's initially it was just a real lolly. It was only right back when we started, it was only 200 grams to 400 grams, but now we feed between 1/2 kilo and 2 kilos, and that helps get the cows into the robot and move them along. Residuals, overgrazing isn't really a problem. I heard Luke say earlier, it's the cows, if they'll get it down to 1600 or 1500 and then they'll leave. So overgrazing is not really a problem. Leaving too much grass behind can be an issue. And there's usually only 2 reasons that will happen. One, because maybe the weather has affected that, they will come out early, or you've just given them too much grass. We just there's different times of the year we do different things. So I find pre-mowing can be quite a valuable tool. So we sort of set the height on the mower at 1700 grams per dry matter, top the paddock, and then the cows love that because it's basically Christmas dinner served up to them, and they just rip into it. And also being organic, we do have weeds in the paddocks, so we're not using any herbicides or glyphosates or anything when we're regrassing. So we do find taproot weeds do come back through the new pastures. So that mowing does help control that as well too. And we do some post-grazing topping as well too at certain times a year. Did I have anything else? I think that might be it, Tori, off the top of my head. Remember anything, I'll cover it in the questions maybe.
Thank you, Brian. Once again, another fantastic presentation. So I'd just like to invite Wayne and Nick to jump back in, and we'll start off our question session. I think listening to the three of you speak, it's a really great example of how not only are you in different regions, you know, Wayne, you're subtropical, Nick down in Tassie, and then Brian in New Zealand, but you change the system and make the system work for you. And it's a really great example of how it can be flexible and make it serve your purpose and your wants as the farm manager. So we'll kick off with the questions now. Please do keep sending them through as we go through the discussion. So the first one is, considering that you're in different climatic regions, how do you manage the feed base with different quality and quantity and time of year? And how does climate in particular impact on the way that you manage the system? That's an in general question, if anyone would like to volunteer an answer.
I can start if you want, Tori. So we, first of all, our main tool of management for the climate that we operate in is that our farm is strictly seasonal. So we're August, September calving, and we dry off for July. And yeah, we basically match our calving pattern to our pasture growth curve to take advantage of that. We do operate a very simple pasture-based system. We operate dryland and irrigated on a perennial ryegrass and white clover system. So I mean, apart from the changing management practices around managing ryegrass throughout the year, it's a fairly similar management across the board. We're probably not poised with some of the same challenges that Wayne probably has with managing kikuyu to the same extent. Our most challenging time for us is probably winter as we approach dry off in managing a wet dairy farming environment and keeping cows fully fed. And at that point, we then start using our feed pad as a fifth break to try and manage that.
Thanks, Nick.
Well, Nick's right. We in reality we manage two systems: the C4 system and the C3 system. So we have ryegrass for 6 months of the year, but we've got to manage the kikuyu for the other 5 months of the year. So it's ready. The paddocks are ready to go to take the ryegrass. The good thing about kikuyu for us is because it's naturalized and it's there, it is almost indestructible. And because that's during our wet time, we can keep grazing it, because when the cows walk on it and wet, they actually basically replant it. You still got to have reasonable drainage. It can get too wet, but you know, a couple of days and judicious use of the feed pad, extra silage and stuff, we don't have too much damage, but we can get around it. So yeah, it's just a matter of getting it sort of, you have a rough idea what the weather's pattern for the year is, and then you just adjust it with what you get. it's just an experience thing. If you don't get it right today, you can always practice and get it right the next day, sort of thing. You just keep building on your experience.
Yeah, it sounds about
Wayne?
right. Got to it there. Yeah, like I mentioned, we're Coxfoot. We've been planting chicory with our mix for a number of years now. I didn't mention we were split calving as well too. So when it does get difficult, we do we are able to close off. Yeah, I can't think much else really. It already covered it.
Thank you. Nick, this is a question for you. You feed higher concentrates and Brian, you lower levels of concentrates, but do you have an issue, Nick, with pasture wastage and leaving it behind? And then Brian, do you have an issue with attracting cows to the dairy without that higher level of concentrate use?
So in answer to the question, no, I don't believe we do. We still abide to the best of our ability to good grazing management practices. We do pasture walks across all our dairy farms, and we manage a wedge no different to most other farmers. Where we utilise supplement for us as dairy farmers is not necessarily to substitute grass out, it's actually to manage a higher stocking rate. So we milk 600 cows. We stocked at nearly 3.5 cows to the hectare, which is at the higher end of most stocking rates. So we utilise that concentrate to run a slightly higher stocking rate. We still capitalise, and our whole system is based off that basal perennial rye in the ration, and the pasture's just there to increase animal intakes, where an animal intake on a pasture-based diet might be 18 or 19 kilos of pasture. We're able to push that to 22, 23 kilos of intake through judicious use of supplement, and hopefully in turn have slightly higher animal production performance, which can justify the use of that supplement.
Thanks, Nick. And Brian, in terms of attracting cows back to the dairy, how do you find that with the low levels of concentrate that you're using?
Yeah, so when we first moved to the robots, of course, we were 100% pasture based. We weren't feeding any grain, and when we commissioned the robots, the animals were already in milk, and we were bringing them down to the shed, and we had this paltry amount of grain in there, and they took no notice of it, and they were in fact balking at it a little bit. They were a bit scared of it because we didn't get the grain in time to train them on it before they had their first milking. So we essentially trained all the cows to go through the robots without any feed at all. I mean, it was there, but they weren't eating it. So we sort of bragged at the time that you don't need concentrate to get them to go through there, but it was 3 to 4 months of pushing cows before they got it. And so where we're at now, we're feeding them a bit more, and even over the last couple of years, increased the amount a little bit as we've been able to grow more on the farm here, but still trying to keep that balance of being predominantly pasture only. And I do see it have an effect on increasing the milking frequency. Oh, sorry. Hey, Mum, are you watching? If you are, can you check the alarms, please? There's a stop alarm at the moment. Thank you. I think watching. Sorry, we're a small operation. There's only 1.5 of us, so over there. Yeah, so the grain, yes, it does have an effect on the cow trafficking, and we've never fed more than sort of an average of 1 kilo, so I can see it affects it positively there, but to say that it stops them from coming, I don't think so. I think that lower amount, it's fine. It's probably, we do notice the late lactation cows, obviously, they're not coming as frequently as the fresh ones. Yeah, you have, so there are days when you're fetching 10% of the cows from the back paddock before you need to set up the next break. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So question for all three of you. Do you think you've achieved the ceiling of your pasture utilization with AMS? And if not, are there potential opportunities to go that next step or to increase that utilization further?
Yeah, Cocky is different to ryegrass in that it sets a limit in itself because of the NDF. It's up there in the later parts of the 60s. So the rough rule of thumb, you got a 12 kilogram dry matter limit. You also, when it's growing the best, is the heat, is the hottest time, and the humidity. So we carry that limit on our pasture intake in some utilization in summer, because to get the best quality pasture, you got to keep the pasture low. So you're sort of limiting yourself. So I reckon we're pretty much there on the Kaiku side, and the ryegrass, there's probably an opportunity there, but most of it goes towards what Nick was saying about feeding the right thing on top of that to maximize their intake and get the most benefit out of your whole ration. So I guess that would be I see that as our target area for going forward, is getting a benefit out of the whole ration. You know, better quality silage, that sort of thing.
My comment would be, I certainly hope there's improvement. You've got to have something to strive for tomorrow, next year, next week. I think, yeah, absolutely. There's things that we can improve in what we do to improve pasture production and quality, and how the cows harvest that. I think there's some really exciting stuff with high energy modified ryegrasses that hopefully should be coming out of Dairy Australia's projects in the next 2 or 3 years. So and obviously that's not just going to impact robotic farmers, but it'll impact all dairy farmers that are willing to look at it. So yeah, I think there's always something to strive for.
Sorry, Tori, was the question specifically about utilisation, was it?
Yes. Well, do you feel that there's potential to improve utilization to push your pastures further, or are you feeling that you're sort of at that comfortable or maximum, I guess, pasture production and therefore utilization? Yeah, I think the utilization is probably about as good as we could hope for, but like what Nick says, it's about getting that quality of pasture and constantly improving them, because it certainly seems that the raw grasses that we're planting now are struggling. Now our climate's getting warmer over here. It's meaning for a lot milder winters, which are great, but of course, you know, the trade-off is you don't have enough, the water table is too low, becomes not able to grow as much grass as you normally would. So there's a whole lot of things we're having to consider moving forward. And Brian, there's a question for you in terms of the way that you measure pasture. You mentioned that when you first started off, you were using plate meters. What are you using at the moment to measure the pasture?
Is this asked by a robot farmer or a conventional farmer? Did we give away the secrets? Look, it's just the case of the cows go in, and how long do they is it before they get it to the right residual and they leave, and it's just a case of learning, okay, I gave them this much last time and there was that much grass, and it really is sort of a use the word organic again, but just the farming by feel, like you kind of, well, for us at least, it's a case of, yeah, the cows were in there last night and they chewed it out nicely and they all left, and that's just something that developed over time. It's become real difficult way to explain exactly how we measure it, but certainly we're still observing how many kilograms of dry matter there are, and we can work out how much they're getting. But in terms of measuring it, it's this paddock's got a 4-break paddock, that paddock's a 5-break paddock, and sort of how it works.
In terms of the voluntary traffic and the traffic patterns, the number of allocations you're giving, you're all changing and tweaking the system to suit your own needs. How important is it that you have that ability, or would you have gone, thinking back to sort of in those early stages, is it something you would recommend for people who are looking into pasture-based AMS to plan that, or is it more an experience thing, and what sort of flexibility should you be factoring in?
Yeah, it was interesting when we started up. We looked at a lot of farms, and most of them were either in New Zealand or Tasmania, and so they weren't so we could see the timing was working for them, and we could understand their timing, but we just had to, basically we took the rough template, what we thought was working well for those farmers, and then Brian's right, it's just basic farming. You just got to observe your cows. They soon tell you if you're right or wrong. It's just, you just got to remember they're not the robots, they're animals, and they respond accordingly to getting enough feed and being happy. So you soon get that feedback that if your and your cows aren't coming back, well, maybe it's time to change. And then they are coming back at another time, and standing around waiting, you just adjust. That would be my feeling.
I think a simple 3-way grazing system was a really good way to start, to sort of feel your way into it, because there's so much that's changing, and just by having something that's standard and predictable and quite easy to manage is a really good place to start. But I think all dairy farmers by nature are constant tweakers and like to change things up and constantly improve. So I'd certainly, if it was me starting back up, if it was me starting a farm for the first time, I'd probably would start around a nice simple 3-way grazing model, but always leave yourself with flexibility to be adaptable to change. Don't ever let your mindset be fixated on this is the way that you have to do it. I mean, it's that ability to change things up, to try new things. That's what makes the mundane job of dairy farming sometimes fun. That's why we're all here. That's why we're talking about what we're doing. It's what makes it an enjoyable job.
Yeah, on what Nick's saying, yeah, it's changing all the time, and like I'll be monitoring how many cows in each area and making sure there's cows ticking over the shed, and that's easily done just by looking at your phone, but or just as you drive past the shed and you can see the cows and what they're doing, and those gate change times, I could change them every day by an hour either way, just based on what's happening. Are they coming too quickly to the shed? If they are, then I'll look at how many are coming and then give them a slightly earlier permission. If it was 12 p.m, then maybe I'll make it 11 a.m. But then, of course, you've got to think, okay, well, now there's X number of cows getting to that break earlier, so that break is going to get grazed out sooner. So you've got to make decisions constantly based on, you don't want to get into the spiral of death where they're going to leave that paddock earlier as well too, and then get to the next one, and then you're all over the place. So do you go and shift that fence a bit or put some baleage in there or something like that? So yeah, you're constantly monitoring that that system, I find anyway, to make sure that it is appropriate for your feed levels and what the cows are feeling and what they're eating, and like next you're tweaking little things here and there, sometimes on a daily basis.
In terms of different pasture species, potentially whether you incorporate, or if you incorporate forage crops and what they are, have you seen a noticeable impact on performance of the system, and how does the system cope when you introduce new grazing species?
Yeah, definitely happy to graze a crop, like we'll graze soybeans if it's available, you know, and that's naturally going to give us a different milk result to cock-ear because there's a higher protein and stuff, for example. And then herbs aren't such a good thing around here because the deeper taproot can drown, and so they're a bit unreliable. But I guess I'll be happy to graze anything. I just think it's that's what cows do. Our cows do is graze, and if it's presented to them, they're going to have it. And yeah, have no hesitation doing it if it was, you know, considered was going to improve their ration and give you more milk. Why wouldn't you?
Our experience, we on fully irrigated farms down here, we tend not to do forage or brassica cropping throughout the summer. We find that good, well-managed perennial pastures seem to outperform that. Really, their only place for us is on dryland farms, or when a paddock's physically damaged and needs renovation. Probably depends on us on the type of crop that we'd consider. A lot of farms in Tassie run off brassica or bulb turnip type summer crops through the summer period. Obviously, your turnips need to be offered under a controlled allocation fairly well, and it does make their management or integration complex into a robotic voluntary system. So when we've had to do it in the past, we've more opted for crops that can be more easily grazed and dropped into a system like leafy turnips or rape or something like that, if necessary. But more often than not, we find ourselves, if we've got a paddock that needs renovation, we go grass back to grass, and leave it fallow for a month if we need to get a good establishment. We just like to keep our system simple.
Yeah, we've never experimented with fodder crops. Yeah, strip grazing them, I guess it doesn't lend itself easily to the free flow trafficking. But maybe if you had a four-way grazing system, you could do it. But then you've got to be careful too with some of the, you know, you need to manage how long they're spending on some of them. So yeah, it could be quite difficult to incorporate them. Yeah, or the only summer cropping is really the chicory that we've done, and we find that works quite well. Adds a bit of extra feed through the dry months.
So in a pasture-based voluntary system, the cows are obviously outside in the weather. How do you imagine changes in climate into the future might impact the system, and have you given thought to or doing things that might address the impacts of climate change in terms of voluntary traffic and production on the farm?
Yep, think about it every day. Thinking about it pretty hard now as we got under a flood watch. I guess, you know, our heat management strategy involved shade trees. That's becoming more and more problematic, just having enough shading areas and letting them dry out quick enough before they go back in. And so, they develop getting rid of that mud. So possibly a shade, some sort of shade, building some sort of shade shelter. It's probably logical. Whether some of our laneways, we're thinking about going to concrete paths in the wetter, in the higher traffic areas. It's definitely something on our minds. It's, you're standing out in it all day, every day, so you can't really hide from it. So, yeah, I'm sure there'll be different pasture species and things become more relevant, different additives. As far as I'm concerned, everything's on the table.
I think it's as much a whole industry issue as much as it's a robot farmer issue. I mean, I think they're saying climate factors, yes, they might impact or influence our voluntary system slightly more than a conventional farm, but everything else, the 99% of other items will affect a conventional farmer just as much as a robotic one. Tassie, we've got reasonably resilient systems to deal with wet because we deal with wet in winters most of the time. We're slowly having to learn to deal with heat stress more. Cows are fairly sooky in Tassie. It gets to 25 degrees and tongues start wagging, whereas Wayne's probably a 30 plus until they start getting affected. So it's a lot of those things that we have to start considering, and in those periods of stress, climatic stress, if you call it, bad weather events, heat events, I think it does come down to the fact that under a voluntary system, you probably need to accept that you've got to intensively manage that system and look after it, rather than just accept a poor animal production or health response as a result. So if it's a hot day, providing shade, managing cow traffic through the dairy as best as you can, make the environment in the dairy and in the paddock the best you can. I think it just comes down to intervening when necessary.
Yeah, but the same with Nick there. We're already getting 25 degrees here, and yesterday I was doing my starting in the afternoon where it was getting quite hot and the cows are under the trees. Yeah, we're quite fortunate here in that the farm has been in the family for about 5 generations now, and we've got some well-established large trees. And my father David, he saw the benefits of that, and so he planted lots of trees along fence lines between paddocks 20, 30 years ago. So we've got quite a lot of shade, which is really great. But yeah, it does, on those cows, they just want to seek shade and just hang out. So yeah, it is a problem moving forward, but it's manageable in the sense that you can go out there, and then you have to interfere with the voluntary nature of the system at times, and you just have to go and fetch them, and just it might just be you circle around behind them and they go, okay, it's time to go, and a few of them tootle off, and you're not fetching the whole lot, you're just fetching a yard full or so, and then they move on.
Well, thank you, Brian, Wayne, and Nick for your presentations, for your insight into how you operate your system. It's been a really, really informative, fantastic session. Just keeping with time so we can stick to the agenda, we might wrap up here, and yeah, thank you again, and we'll move on to session 3, which is looking at the management of AMS in indoor barn systems.
Thanks, Tori.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.